These longtime public servants have not said why they're stepping down, but we can confirm they were asked to investigate the shooting death of Renee Good. Doug Kelly, a former federal prosecutor, called this a very dark day for Minnesota.
So, here's a wild situation that's been brewing for a while. You know how serious fraud cases usually get investigated thoroughly? Well, some folks have been caught, and that's how it should work. When someone breaks the law, they face the consequences and end up in jail. But it's not about punishing entire communities for what a few bad apples do. It's about holding individuals accountable. Now, here's where it gets a bit concerning. If everyone really cares about these investigations, how is it that all the people working on prosecuting the crime just packed up and left? In a bizarre turn of events, Pam Bondi appeared on television looking pretty furious and defensive, trying to explain why 6 top federal prosecutors in Minnesota had abruptly disappeared. The more she talked, the worse it sounded, not just for her, but for the whole Department of Justice, too.
Sean, we support Secretary Noem. We support our men and women of Homeland Security and ICE, who are out there taking predators off the street every day around the country, and they're doing it in Minnesota. What happened in Minnesota? We had 6 prosecutors who suddenly decided they didn't want to support the men and women in ICE.
It's critical to understand that these folks weren't just random staff members. They were senior federal prosecutors, the experienced ones who had been handling some heavy-duty cases, including long-standing fraud investigations that kicked off during the Biden administration. These cases were already in motion and staffed, so when all 6 of these seasoned prosecutors decide to walk out simultaneously, it isn't just a simple HR shakeup. It's a huge red flag.
One of them was busy doing a photo shoot with the New York Times while ICE was out there risking their lives. So they came, they said, we want to resign, but we want to use our annual leave up until April, meaning they wanted the taxpayers to pay for them to go on vacation because they decided they didn't want to support law enforcement. So the breaking news tonight, I fired them all.
So here's the scoop. We've got some big shakeups happening in the Department of Justice, specifically with our U.S. Attorney, Rosen, who just started a few months ago. Talk about being thrown into the deep end. Around the country, there's this trend with what some folks are calling the deep state, and it's causing a lot of stir. Interestingly, it turns out that some of these lawyers had been quietly looking for jobs with liberal law firms before all this went down. Honestly, they seem like a human resources nightmare. Just to give you an idea, one of them defended the Black Lives Matter movement back in 2022 when things got pretty chaotic, leading to a tragic situation. So, these aren't exactly your typical team players, and they've made it clear they don't want to be working alongside Donald Trump's administration or the Department of Justice anymore.
One of them actually in 2022 defended BLM when they burned down a pawn shop and someone was murdered. Yeah, they want to be part of the resistance. Yeah, bring it on. They're not going to be working for Donald Trump and the Department of Justice any longer. But that's what we're up against, not only in Minnesota, but around this country.
Now, the plot thickens. According to Bondi, the folks who resigned didn't do so because they were underperforming or being unprofessional. No, it was all about a disagreement on how to handle a sensitive investigation. This debate revolves around the tragic death of Renee Nicole Good. There's been a lot of chatter out there suggesting that prosecutors faced pressure to focus on Good's widow instead of digging deeper into the actions of the officer involved in her death, Jonathan Ross. Bondi has pushed back against that narrative, but the resignations hint that there was more tension lurking beneath the surface. This tension is significant since prosecutors are trained to follow the evidence wherever it leads rather than letting politics get in the way.
On Tuesday, Joe Thompson and 5 other federal prosecutors resigned because of how the Department of Justice is handling the investigation of Renee Good's death after pushing state investigators out. That's according to this New York Times report confirmed by KARE 11 sources, saying the wave of resignations was triggered by DOJ officials pushing for a criminal investigation into Good's widow.
When management starts hinting that some cases are more important than others, especially ones involving fatalities, it creates an ethical dilemma. So, when these prosecutors expressed their desire to quit, Bondi didn't just let it slide. Instead, she took to television and boasted about their firings, labeling it as her way of tackling what she called the deep state. On Shan Hannity's show, she painted a picture of unfaithful bureaucrats who wouldn't back the officers in charge, even accusing one of them of doing a photo shoot with the New York Times while agents were out there taking real risks.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Minnesota. You have multiple employees now that have resigned. They didn't like the fact that there's an investigation into some of these groups. We call it astroturfing. There are different groups, even crowds that you can purchase, believe it or not, which is insane.
Your level prosecutors, after all, don't just up and leave their careers unless something major is going down. There was this incident where a guy from the Department of War ended up in jail, and well, it seems like a search warrant was issued to snag back some classified information that really belonged there. It's a tricky situation since the reporter had no clue that what they had was classified. So, in light of that, returning it to the Department of Justice seems fair enough. And then there was this whole drama involving a lady who abruptly terminated some employees over their plans to use a kind of extended leave. She thought she was showing strength, but for many it came off quite differently. Most people don't realize how rare mass resignations are in the DOJ. When experienced attorneys call it quits, they take decades of knowledge and accountability with them. Minnesota wasn't the only spot for this shakeup either. Reports also surfaced about similar departures from the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., mainly due to disagreements over what the investigative priorities should be. That is definitely one way to shake up the system. And then there's Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who made a point that really hit home when he was asked about fraud investigations. He said if people genuinely care about prosecuting fraud, they should be worried that the prosecutors handling those cases have vanished. It's simple math. Fewer prosecutors mean fewer cases being handled, slower investigations, and weaker enforcement overall. While the firings were happening, it seems like Bondi couldn't catch a break. She was also taking questions about the DOJ actually giving the green light on something else entirely. But it's all connected. It really makes you think about how trust in these institutions can be shaken, especially when so many experienced folks are leaving. So there's this situation where the FBI searched the home of Hannah Natanson, a Washington Post reporter. She's known in the media world for her strong connections within the federal government and has gained the trust of whistleblowers from various agencies. According to Pam Bondi, the reason behind this search was to recover classified materials said to belong to the Department of Defense and not to go after journalism itself. She pointed out that a former IT contractor from the Defense Department is already in jail for leaking sensitive information and was adamant that the First Amendment wasn't on the line here. This was a matter of national security, in her words, but not everyone sees it that way. Earlier this year, Bondi rescinded a memo put out by Merrick Garland that had been designed to limit the DOJ's powers to subpoena reporters or seize journalistic records. She claimed this change was essential for safeguarding classified information and protecting military personnel. Critics, however, argue that loosening those restrictions could blur the line between keeping secrets safe and intimidating the press, which feels pretty risky. In my opinion, that's where the stories begin to intertwine. Prosecutors stepping down, journalists getting searched, and leadership reinterpreting dissent as disloyalty. All of this raises a significant question. What direction is the DOJ heading in? And it's a question that picked up steam when Republican lawmakers were grilled about the long-awaited release of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. Representative Lauren Boebert claimed the DOJ was releasing quite a bit of information, despite only a tiny percentage of records being made public. Meanwhile, Representative Tim Burchett argued that Democrats had previously requested redactions that slowed everything down. Then there's the stark contrast with Democratic Representative Pat Ryan when he was asked about a Ford plant worker who publicly took issue with Donald Trump's connections to Epstein and ended up getting suspended. Ryan didn't hold back. He called the worker a patriot using his free speech and accused Trump of failing working-class Americans despite what his campaign said. No matter what side you take, the difference in how they approach these issues is pretty noticeable. And we can't forget about Minneapolis, which sometimes gets overshadowed in these discussions. Mayor Frey wasn't just focusing on the prosecutors, he was addressing priorities. He stood up for the city's separation ordinance, stating that police should prioritize violent crime over immigration enforcement. Frey didn't shy away when faced with a heartbreaking situation involving a drunk driving incident that allegedly involved an undocumented immigrant who had been let go by local authorities. He was very clear that anyone who breaks the law should be arrested, prosecuted, and put behind bars. His focus wasn't on arguing for immunity. Instead, he highlighted something most people overlook. You can stand behind law enforcement while also understanding that blanket enforcement can actually make communities less secure. And honestly, it's quite a chaotic scene right now. On one side, the leadership at the Department of Justice claims it's all about loyalty, security, and maintaining law and order. Meanwhile, you've got prosecutors, mayors, journalists, and civil servants suggesting that things have really taken a wrong turn. Even those who support Bondi can't ignore one glaring reality. When a bunch of seasoned prosecutors pack up and leave all at once, when journalists are getting scrutinized, and when dissent within the organization is branded as resistance, the system begins to crumble from within. From my perspective, that's why Pam Bondi seems more like she's in damage control mode during her TV spots rather than exuding confidence. The anger, the defensiveness, the endless explaining about why so many are choosing to walk away. This isn't just a Minnesota issue or about a single investigation anymore. It raises the bigger question of whether the DOJ can maintain its independence or if it's sliding towards something much more politically driven and unstable. This isn't just a matter of left versus right, it's a matter that affects the institution itself. We'll keep an eye on how this plays out because the ramifications are far from theoretical. They hit close to home, touching upon prosecutions, civil rights, press freedom, and ultimately the trust the public has in these institutions.